Hello, ninth grade, and welcome to May 4th. As an avid Star Wars follower, I share May the 4th be with you. As most of you know, one of the most common phrases in the Star Wars saga happens to be, May the Force be with you. So Star Wars fans have sort of taken this day and made it into their Star Wars celebration of May the 4th be with you. And not to be outdone by Darth Vader's lightsaber, I brought my own lightsaber with me today, actually the one that I made, which I love, and thought I might just share this with you. I don't know if you can see the green color on the screen, can you? Yeah, I love this one. This one is made in keeping with Yoda and Yoda's experience and wisdom and his Jedi nature. So again, hope you're find a little something today. Bring your own force with you. And may the 4th be with you. All right, let's read now. We are really in deep with this because they're on they're on the mountain and it's precarious, and the scene is right here of where they're all positioned on this mountain. So we're going to begin reading on the bottom of page 198. Thank you to those of you who are continuing to read. Amazing. And let's just keep reading. Bob Bates didn't see Molinar fall, but it looked to him like an invisible hand was swatting people off the slope. First Strather, then Houston, and Houston was roped to him. Bates swung his ice axe wildly at the slope, but when the rope went taut, Houston's weight flipped him backward off the ice. He landed on his pack and slid head first down the mountain. The hood of his parka pulled over his eyes. Down he went, bumping over rocks embedded in the ice, feeling an eerie distance from it all. It was over, he thought, and there wasn't a thing he could do about it. He had lived a good life, climbed well, and now it was done. Then, with a sharp tug of the rope around his waist, he stopped. They all stopped. High on the slope at the top of a rat's nest of taut and tangled ropes, Pete Schoenig leaned against his ice axe, a single rope carving into his hips. It had all happened in seconds. He saw George Bell start to go and braced himself in case Bell's rope got caught in his own. The impact came in a series of jolts, the rope tightening around his waist, the axe straining against the rock that held it in place. The jolt stopped and left the rope quivering, stretched to half its normal width. Schoenig gripped it hard and leaned into the axe, trying to take weight off the rock. If the rock broke free of the ice, there was no way the belay would hold. Gilkey and whoever else he was holding would go tumbling down the mountainside, and he would go with them. Schoenig was afraid to turn around. He could tell his belay was supporting a lot more than just Art Gilkey's cocoon. Had he been able to take in the entire slope below, he would have pieced together what happened. One rope swept into another and then another, pulling 5 climbers into free fall down the mountain. Now, those 5 men and Art Gilkey's cocoon lay tangled in a web of ropes on a sheer ice slope, saved from an 8,000-foot fall to the Godwin-Austen Glacier by Schoenig and his axe. Pete Schoenig didn't know all of this, but he did know that the wind was howling and his hands were freezing, and the rope had been stretched near its breaking point. Below him, he heard Tony Strather yell to anyone who could hear him, "Get your weight off the rope. At least 200 feet below Schoening, Bates lay splayed on his back with his head below his feet. His arms were hopelessly tangled in a web of rope over his head. He tried to move and couldn't, which was just as well. He had stopped at the edge of a steep drop-off near the top of the black pyramid, his head nearly hanging off the ledge. He heard a groan come from surprisingly close, and then a voice. "Who's there?" someone asked. Bates looked up to see Molinar picking himself up off the slope, blood dripping from his nose onto his beard. Molinar was shaken from the fall, but he managed to free Bates' arms from the rope. They both got a better purchase on the ledge and began to look around. 50 feet up the slope, Strether stood on shaky legs, trying to make sense of the tangle of ropes around his waist. 75 feet below, Bell was hauling himself over a ledge that seemed to drop off into nothing. To Bell's right, a crumpled figure lay on a ledge below a 30-foot cliff. The figure was Charlie Houston, and he wasn't moving at all. As Bell climbed closer through the blowing snow, Bates could see he had lost his backpack, his goggles, and his gloves. "My hands are freezing," Bell said. Bates pulled out a spare pair of mittens and handed his backpack off to Molinar. His sleeping bag had nearly been torn loose during the fall, and tonight it could mean the difference between life and death. He climbed down to Bell, whose hands and face had turned a sickly white. He wrestled the mittens into Bell's frozen hands and scrambled as quickly as he could over to Houston. Houston lay unconscious on the ledge, and Bates leaned over him, expecting the worst. But when he touched his shoulder, Charlie's eyes opened. Houston propped himself up and tried to focus on the surroundings. "Where are we?" he asked. "What are we doing here?" Bates explained exactly why they were clinging to the side of a 28,000-foot mountain in a blizzard. Then, while Molinar anchored Houston's rope from above, Bates tried to get his friend to climb. Again and again, he told Houston they had to get to shelter, but Houston wouldn't budge. He had obviously suffered a concussion, and his eyes wouldn't focus. It was like talking to a sleepwalker. Bates started to grow desperate. They had all survived the fall, but in their current state, they couldn't possibly haul Houston up 150 feet of steep rock and ice to camp. Finally, Bates grabbed his friend and looked him in the eye. "Charlie," he said, "if you ever want to see Dorcas and Penny again, climb up there right now." Houston suddenly looked terrified. He said nothing, turned, and scrambled up the slope to Molinar. As Bates climbed up after him, he could hear Charlie asking Molinar, "What are we doing here?" When George Bell lost his footing at the top of the ice slope, Bob Craig had been at Camp 7, recovering from the avalanche and trying to get a tent set up on the tiny ledge. He heard a couple of shouts and looked up. A moment ago, the team had been stretched out across 150 feet of ice slope, trying to pull Art Gilkey across to the camp. Suddenly, they had vanished. All he could make out was a single ice axe jammed into the slope. Then a curtain of swirling snow came down and obscured it all. We're going to stop there on page 203, and we will continue tomorrow, 9th grade. Thank you so much for continuing to read. And as they say in Star Wars, may the 4th be with you. Bye now. See you later.